Ken and Ruth Ann, we first met back in 2000 at the Master's College, and Ruth Ann, you were signed up to take the MABC program. And since then, we've become very dear friends, my wife and the two of you. We've just known each other over these years and been praying for each other. So it was about a year into the program when you brought up the topic for a thesis about how to deal with an adult child, your daughter, Becky, who had chosen the gay lifestyle. So I'd like to just ask you both some questions that would encourage and help other parents who may have a son or a daughter who's chosen the gay lifestyle, and that you can encourage them of how God has been faithful to you all and grown your faith during these years. Maybe start, Ken, briefly describe what parenting Becky was like. You have two daughters.
Yes. Two daughters, older, and yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was it like?
Well, she was a bubbly, carefree child. She very outgoing and no trouble at all. She was a delight to raise. We lived in Southwest Florida, the beautiful beaches. We were always on the beach or in the boat fishing, and our girls are certified divers. So we were in the outdoors, so they loved the outdoors, and she gave us no problem. She and her mother were very, very close. And we had begun with some families in the church a Christian school, so Ruth Ann taught there. So we had basically total control through the 12 years that they were there. But Beck was a sweetheart, and it was a joy to raise.
Ruth Ann?
And I remember neighbors had moved next door to us, and Becky was about 6 or 7, and she went to welcome them into the community, and she came back and she said, "Mommy, I don't think they love Jesus." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And she said, "Because they don't go to church." So she was very outgoing. One beautiful thing I remember is when she entered high school, and every year we would take our beach towels down to the Gulf, and we would have a time of prayer before school started, her as a student and me as a teacher. And we memorized scripture together, and she was just a delight.
Did you have any idea that Becky was entertaining the thoughts of the same-sex attraction and started going down that path, or not? Did this just sort of surprise you both, or did you see anything that...
She had a lot of friends. We had a lot of friends, always had friends over and everything. There's nothing to alert us at all concerning this. It wasn't until her third year after we found out about it after her college graduation. So we had known nothing up to that. There was no obvious signs at all.
I was a little suspicious because of some interactions I saw with another girl, and particularly one night I used to go up and make vegetable soup for her when she worked, and so I heard the phone ring like 1:15 in the morning, and then again like 4 something, and the flags went off, and then I saw a list of phone calls, and it was to the same number. And so when she came home from the hospital that evening, I said to her, "Becky, are you," and I mentioned her friend, "are you more than just friends?" And she said, I remember she sat on the back of the sofa and she said, "Mom, I've been living as a lesbian for 4 years." Even though I suspected it, that was the saddest day of my life. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get home fast enough.
Now, you said that was one of the saddest days. What did you begin to process? What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I wrote in my journal, and I've brought a few things along, and I wrote this: when the truth comes out, you're shocked. you don't have the capacity to believe. You may have no tears, or you may cry buckets of tears. You don't want to hear the label. You think, could this be different? Could this be a phase? And then, of course, what should we do? And what can we do? We can't force her to come back home. She's got a job. What did we do wrong? What did we do that we shouldn't have done? You know, what shouldn't we done that we did? You know, and so then everything became secretive. I didn't want anybody to know. I was proud that we had raised our 2 girls in the church, and so I didn't want anybody to know.
Did you share the news with Ken, or did Becky tell Ken?
No,
Or
I
Dad?
called him on the phone, and I was supposed to leave that night. And when she got home from work, I said, please take me to the airport. And so I got another flight down, and I met him, and he was gray when I saw him.
Well, it was quite a shock. I mean, it was a devastating shock. I had lost a brother years before to the complications of AIDS. He was a university professor. I know he was straight. He was not bent toward the homosexual style at all until perhaps in his mid-30s in the academic circles. He chose to go that way and died within 15 years of AIDS. So it was a shock. So I had known a little bit about the consequences of choosing that lifestyle.
What were you beginning to process about your own daughter, though? I mean, having gone through that with your brother, but this was your daughter.
All I could think about is Beck had the foundations. My brother and my 4 siblings were brought up in a violent, alcoholic household. So, but Becky was brought up with this stability of the Christian church, Christian school, Christian college. So I couldn't reconcile her going that way. It's a bad choice. It's a bad choice. And I processed from the very beginning, it's not going to be if she comes back to God. And leaves the lifestyle, it's when. And that's what I held on to.
Okay. What scriptures, Ken, did God bring to your mind or take you to that you found some comfort in during this time, just as you're processing
Of course,
the
Romans
news?
8:28, that God works all things together for his good. And I hung on the awareness of God, the sovereignty of God, the awareness of God. He knew it. He knew it all the time. He knows it. And he is sovereign, and he works all things together for our good and for his purpose. And that really, and there are a lot of scriptures that you can hang on to, but I think that was one of the primary things.
Okay.
Producing the sovereignty of God, or explaining the sovereignty of God and his workings.
All right. Ruth Ann, how about yourself?
Well, I'm a mother, so I was afraid. And so I went to the Psalms and I prayed the Psalms, particularly cast all your care on the Lord, for he cares for you. And then I wrote in my journal again, and it says, how do you cast your care on him and yet be in prayer without it taking a toll on your body and mind? Where's the balance you need to give it to God, but on the other hand, do your part? And what is my part? Will so many hours of prayer or lots of fasted meals do the job, or is it the Holy Spirit's working? This was written just a few days after we found out. And how do you pray? Make her miserable? Bring a crisis to wake her up? Ignore the topic in conversation? What do you talk about? You try to say things that bring her around and it comes out wrong, or they take it wrong. She would take it wrong. But the truth is clear. And do you go about life ignoring this problem, this sin? And the urge is to give up.
What was your relationship like with Becky after she shared that news?
Well, we used to talk on the phone every day, and that was cut off. And like I said, the conversation, what do you talk about?
Was cut off by you, by her, is mutual? What?
Probably mutual. I
Okay.
don't know. You know, we just didn't talk much anymore. It was very strained. In my diary, I wrote again, I'm tired, and it's only been 7 days. Wait for 7 weeks, or 7 months, or 7 years. We've only begun, and that is exhausting. How does one continue without God when I'm struggling with Him? And then another entry was, a peace from God swept over me while I was dwelling on this unexpected trial. I wrote, I want to cry as I know God is working, and He will bring victory. I don't know when or how or where, but He will. He is almighty. And then about a week later, I wrote, the feeling is empty. The unknown is so hard to bear. Conversation is strained. What is happening where she is? I know what's happening here. And is prayer necessary, or has providence already worked and the results are set? Who knows? And what is my part? Are the results depending on how much I do? And then I remembered that God is interceding too. Does He really need me to pray? And maybe the prayer's for me. So all of these things were...
You had a lot of questions.
Yes, a lot of questions.
Were you finding answers in your Bible study time, or you were just writing the questions?
I was just writing these out, and like some days, you know, I know this is going to be okay, and other days I thought this is hopeless.
Did she tell you that she got married to her partner, or?
We did not know until Becky started serving the Lord, and we just didn't know. And she told us then. And what was, again, my prideful life here, friends on Facebook that we had thought kept all of this from, they knew. So we felt very foolish.
It brings up the area of you. It's one of those things as parents, who do you share it with? Did you have some close friends, Ken, that you were able to share this with, pray with you? What about your church? Were you able to share?
No, unfortunately, we didn't have any real close men in the church. We had moved a couple times, so we had built a home up in North Carolina and Georgia at that time, and we were going back and forth, but we really didn't. And then men kind of handle things differently than women. We can kind of divert away from the problem in our work or in our hobbies or in some diversion. The pain is still there and the problem is still there. But with a woman, with Ruth Ann, it's there all the time. I mean, it's a mom. It's on her mind all the time, day in and day out. And unfortunately, we didn't have too many people to share it with. I wish we had now, for prayer's sake, if nothing else.
I didn't want to share it. I wanted it to just stay there. So I didn't tell anyone until I got into biblical counseling, and the two counselors I worked with, I shared with them. And then as the years went by, I shared only with people that I knew would pray for her. I never shared with anyone just to give them information. One of the hard things during this time is someone would say, well, how's Becky doing? Well, you know, the automatic is fine. And I thought, that's not true. So I would say, well, she tells me she's working hard. So I would divert it. So it was a bunch of diversion and secretive and just not being open. And like Ken said, I wish we had maybe been more open with it, but there's seems like a stigma on homosexuality, and people wonder, wow, what happened to her? What's going on in the home? And so, no.
And that's usually the way people think is, what was wrong with the parents? Something
Yeah.
was wrong with the parents.
What happened in that
yeah,
home?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I remember when you first brought that up to me at the college, and I added to my prayer list. And then I remember getting a phone call from you. There had been some breakthrough, a turning to Christ, turning her attention back, and a major problem happened in her relationship with her partner, in her marriage there. And explain what happened there.
For about 15, we didn't know for 4 years, so the 15 years I'm talking about, every once in a while the phone would ring and I would think, is this the call that I've been waiting for? And of course it never was. But August 18th, 2009, we were eating out on the deck in North Carolina, looking out over the mountains, and I get this call at 5:15 in the afternoon, and she said, "Mom, I'm ready to get right with God." And it was like, would you repeat that? No, I didn't say that, but it was like, whoa, okay. And I was delighted, but I was also afraid because she's thousands of miles away. Who would help her? And so it was a wonderful call, but I was also apprehensive as to if it was real, if it would last, those feelings, yeah.
And so did you call?
Ken was
Ken,
sitting
right?
right
Oh, he was
there.
sitting right there.
Oh, he was sitting right there, and I said, Becky says she's ready to get right with God. And yeah, that was wonderful.
Answers to prayer.
Oh, absolutely.
It was 19 years. Is that right? Was it 15?
Well, it's 15 that we knew about it.
Okay,
15
and
years
then
of
4
prayer.
before then.
Right.
You called me and said, "Who do I know?" Did you bring up to her that as far as a counselor? She was saying, "I want to
Absolutely.
go talk to a counselor."
Well, I
Or-
don't know how that
Okay,
happened, whether
okay.
she asked for one or whether I suggested one. And so
Okay.
I called you and another friend that was in my class at the college. And I said, there's 2 people out there. Who would you recommend? And they both recommended Tom Alward. Alward, yes.
Yeah. An ACBC counselor out in Portland area.
Right, in Beaverton, I think he is.
Yeah.
Yes. And she went to see him a couple of times. We actually went out with her to see her, and then we went to one of the sessions with her.
Once she started talking with Tom, what was your relationship like then with Becky? I mean, were you on the phone every day then with her? I mean, it was strained before. Now she's
Now it was
seeking
back
help.
to every day again.
Back-
Be able to discuss spiritual things, had devotions over the phone. Ruth Ann was on
Oh,
the
wow.
phone quite a bit. It's just that breath of fresh air.
If you could summarize what biblical principles, I mean, you mentioned the sovereignty of God, and He's at work for our good to those who love Him. But what biblical principles would you share with other parents who might hear the same news, find out the news that their son or daughter has chosen the homosexual lifestyle and that path, that could be an encouragement to them?
I would say you have to love them and pray for them, of course, and you have to maintain a relationship. About halfway into these 15 years, she called me and she said, "Mom, a friend of mine," she named her name, is in the hospital and she's dying. And she said, I went in to see her and she said, "Becky, I don't want to burn in hell." And so Becky said, I helped her pray the sinner's prayer, and you know, her parents, he was a minister, and they had disowned her. They wanted nothing to do with her. And I thought, this is not going to happen. If it happens, it'll have to be Becky, because I'm going to pursue a relationship. Another advice I would give is, if you have other children, the tendency is to just pray for this one almost all the time, to the neglect of the other ones. And that's something you have to really maintain. And also cherish your relationship with your spouse, because that can tear you apart. And you need to pray together and be like-minded toward your son or daughter.
Ken?
You certainly have to look at the nature of God and know who He is. He is good. He is good. And, and then when you look at your own life and see how far He's brought you and what pit that He dug you out of, you don't want to let that cleavage come between you and your child. It can drive that wedge in between you. You can't let fear or anger, you feel a lot of anger, or disappointment, really disappointment, invade and separate you and keep you from loving your child. But you have to love them and forgive them, and if they turn to the Lord, forgive them as Christ forgave you.
Ruth Ann, you're an ACBC certified counselor. Have other women come across your path in these 19 years who have said that they're struggling with dealing with an issue similar to what you all were going through?
I just had a few come through, and I've tried to tell them what we went through, and I do tell them right up front, this may be a long time, but don't give up. It was a NANG conference years ago, and there was a workshop on counseling from Genesis. And I've read Genesis probably 50 times in my lifetime, and I've read this same verse, but it just popped out at me, and this was like 2 years before she came to the Lord, and it says, is anything too hard for God? When Sarah doubted.
Yeah.
And at that point, into this many years, it was like I saw the word hopeless almost before my eyes, but I always added, but for God. Hopeless, but for God.
Yeah.